back. Let's get into that story in the US because I find it absolutely fascinating that an Arctic blast has caused these mass blackouts in Texas, with many of the state's wind turbines frozen solid by the chill, with wind accounting for a quarter of Texas' energy mix. I mean, it was the black oil state, wasn't it? And 42% of its power in the last week. The failure of these turbines sent demand for power surging across the state. Now, for more on this, I'm joined by my regular international panel from Sydney, co-host, excuse me, of Outsiders, James Morrow, from Adelaide, Corey Bernardi. Gentlemen, great to have you on the show as always.
Great to be here, Peter.
Excuse
Hey,
me,
Peter.
I'm still shocked by all that stuff in Texas. Look, Corey, let's be frank. We've both been pretty dubious on the benefit of renewables displacing baseload power. This is extraordinary.
Well, right around the world, because it's not just in Texas, Peter, it's happening in Europe too. And the pin-up boy for the green movement, of course, is Germany. But right now, Germany is blanketed in snow. The solar panels don't work. The wind turbines are having coal-fired power pumped into them in order to stop them freezing and falling to bits. So thank goodness for coal from Poland. Thank goodness for nuclear from France. Thank goodness for Russian gas. And I think the greenies would be praying that global warming comes back, because these polar vortexes are making life miserable for those reliant on renewable energy.
James, this is just a joke, isn't it? I mean, this is the, as I say, black oil, Texas tea. This was the state that has so much of it in the ground. It's impoverished itself. And we in the West, we're deindustrialising at a time when there's greater threats from China than ever before.
Well, I know, Peter, and I mean, it is just ridiculous if you think about it, but it also, does it remind anybody out there listening of, you know, maybe another nation, another country that has lots of energy in the ground and yet has really high electricity prices and an increasingly unstable grid? Well, yes, Australia. So this Texas situation, Peter, is a huge warning, and it's a huge wake-up call to our governments here, you know, New South Wales, which is pushing a very hard green line on its energy, to the federal government not to go down this same road. You know, you talked about the geopolitics before, and I think what Corey said was fascinating. Germany has denuclearized itself, but now it's dependent on nuclear from France, and also it's now more dependent than ever on Russia. So you've emboldened Russia by going green. All of this stuff is just a complete joke.
Absolutely, and you're so right about Germany. They crow about moving away from their nuclear, but they've got a great big fat pipe into France. And if you look at the borderline with France, you can see all these French nuclear stations dotted right along the boundary because they're supplying into Germany. So Germany doesn't have to own up to having nuclear, if you can believe it. Anyway, that's because of Merkel, isn't it, Corey? Merkel and that hard, crazy coalition she's got with the Greens to keep her in power. I want to go to this bombshell report, this report out about the federal government siding on to all of our defence secrets with a Chinese data company. I find it extraordinary. But it was yesterday's news, but we find out today, of course, that the ATO and the Australian Securities Investments Commission, or ASIC, is also involved in this company, Global Switch, involved giving away our personal information.
Yeah, it is extraordinary, Peter. Global Switch, of course, has had an incremental increase in ownership to 100% by the Chinese now. The Australian government has known about this for a very long time. It's been building over incremental purchases, as we know, but they haven't somehow found time enough to move the servers and all the information. They'll say the sensitive data, of course, is stored away, but how can we really believe that? We know the Chinese have hacked into the ASIO blueprint plans. They get into the Parliament House servers whenever they can. They're going rampant through all of our technology. Well, I don't think this is good enough, and I think they've got to get their servers out of these Chinese server farms and get them into something secure, like a Fort Knox type building here in Australia.
Yeah, and considering too, Corey, we put $1.3 billion on the table last year, as we should, for cybersecurity measures. But, we're basically opening the back door. We can shut the front door, but we're opening up the back door if we're putting all of this information on Chinese companies, because there's no such thing as a private company in China. They're all sort of communist entities with a sort of a front face that says they're private, but of course they never are. James, I want to go to you about President Biden today dismissing these these Uighur circumstances. I find this extraordinary. This is where the left usually bleeds, but they're not bleeding much here now. This is the imprisonment of thousands of Uighurs, and he calls it just a different norm in China. I mean, this is extraordinary. I think we might have a clip there. No clip, but in any event, it was at a town hall meeting, wasn't it, James?
It was a town hall meeting. Yeah, it was a town hall meeting that I think CNN did. We're actually be talking a lot more about this on Outsiders on Sunday. But he said, basically, you know, they have a different way of operating. And, you know, it's so funny because I'm old enough to show my age that I remember when the left's big cause was free Tibet. You know, and now, of course, they don't want to hear about the Uighurs. They don't want to hear about anything. They just want to sell movies and sports into China, and they don't care about any of that stuff. But what's happening in the Xinjiang region of China is absolutely horrifying. We've had more and more reports of mass detentions, mass rapes, all sorts of really horrific things. And yet now he says, oh, well, it's just a different way of doing things. And it's not just, you know, the Democrats, the left's cupidity when it comes to doing business with China. It's also a deeper fundamental problem. You know, the left has always, Peta, been about cultural relativism. You know, we can't say that our culture is better than anybody else's. So this is the end result. It's not only do you not stand up for your own values, but you also excuse any sort of horror show because, hey, who are we to judge?
Well, let's have a listen. We've found that clip. Let's have a look.
The central principle of Xi Jinping is that there must be a united, tightly controlled China. And he uses his rationale for the things he does based on that. I point out to him, no American president can be sustained as a president if he doesn't reflect the values of the United States. And so the idea, I'm not going to speak out against what he's doing in Hong Kong, what he's doing with the Uighurs in western mountains of China, and Taiwan trying to end the one China policy by making it forceful. I said, and by the he said he gets it. Culturally, there are different norms at each country, and their leaders are expected to follow.
It's incredibly weak, Corey.
Oh, Peter, I look at that and I see a decrepit old man, quite frankly, who doesn't really know what he's saying. But what is extraordinary is the talking point at the end, that this is just a cultural thing. And that is straight out of the Chinese Communist Party manifesto. And it suggests to me that the Chinese Communist Party's investment in Hunter Biden is paying off in spades. It is doing a huge disservice to the entire Western world and freedom lovers everywhere.
Yeah, and again, I say, Australia, if you think America's going to save you from a Chinese move down into our region even harder than they are now, you're kidding yourself if you look at those comments from Biden. So why on earth would we make ourselves energy poor right at this moment in time? Corey Bernardi, James Morrow, as always, thanks for your time.
Thanks, Peta.
Thanks, Peter.